In the heart of Manhattan's prestigious Whitmore Art Gallery, security cameras captured something that should have been impossible. At exactly 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night, renowned artist Elena Vasquez walked into the gallery's main exhibition hall to check on her latest masterpiece before its grand unveiling. The cameras show her entering the room, but they never show her leaving. When the gallery owner arrived the next morning, Elena was gone, her painting had been slashed beyond recognition, and the only clue left behind was a single white rose placed precisely where she had been standing. The room had no other exits, no windows large enough for escape, and the security system showed no signs of tampering. Elena Vasquez had simply vanished into thin air, leaving behind a mystery that would challenge everything Detective Sarah Chen thought she knew about the impossible. Detective Sarah Chen had seen her share of strange cases in her 15 years with the NYPD, but nothing quite like this. The call came in at 8:15 a.m. from Marcus Whitmore, owner of the Whitmore Art Gallery, his voice trembling as he tried to explain what he had discovered. Sarah arrived at the gallery within 20 minutes, her partner Detective James Rodriguez close behind, both of them expecting another routine missing person case. They had no idea they were about to step into a puzzle that would consume the next month of their lives. The Whitmore Gallery occupied a converted warehouse in Chelsea, its soaring ceilings and exposed brick walls providing the perfect backdrop for contemporary art. Marcus Whitmore met them at the entrance, a thin man in his 60s with silver hair and nervous eyes that darted constantly toward the main exhibition hall. He had owned the gallery for over 30 years and had never experienced anything remotely like this situation. "She was supposed to meet me here this morning," Marcus explained as he led them through the gallery's pristine white corridors. "Elena always arrives early on the day before a major exhibition. She's very particular about her work." His voice caught slightly as he spoke about the missing artist, and Sarah made a mental note to explore their relationship further. The main exhibition hall stretched out before them like a cathedral of art, with Elena's paintings mounted on the walls in careful arrangement. At the center of the room stood an easel where her latest work had been displayed, now bearing only the tattered remains of what had once been a canvas. The painting had been slashed with such violence that strips of canvas hung like wounded skin, revealing the wooden frame beneath. "Tell me about the security system," Sarah said, pulling out her notebook as James began photographing the scene. The gallery's security setup was impressive, with cameras covering every angle of the main hall and motion sensors that would trigger if anyone moved through the space after hours. Marcus led them to the security office, a cramped room filled with monitors and recording equipment. "Everything is digital now," he explained, pulling up the footage from the previous night. "We can review every minute from any camera in the building." The timestamp on the screen read 11:47 p.m. as they watched Elena enter the exhibition hall through the main entrance. Elena Vasquez appeared on screen as an elegant woman in her early 40s, her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, wearing jeans and a paint-stained sweater. She moved with the confident grace of someone completely comfortable in the space, walking directly to her painting and standing before it for several minutes. The camera angle showed her in profile, and Sarah could see her lips moving as if she were talking to herself or perhaps to the painting. "She often talked to her work," Marcus said softly, noticing Sarah's observation. "Said it helped her see what needed to be changed." At 11:52 p.m., Elena stepped closer to the painting, reaching out as if to touch the canvas, though the angle made it impossible to see if she actually made contact. Then, at exactly 11:54 p.m., she stepped back and moved out of the camera's range toward the center of the room. "Here's where it gets strange," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. The camera continued recording, showing the empty exhibition hall with Elena's painting visible in the frame. Minutes passed with no movement, no sign of Elena returning to the camera's view. "We have 6 cameras in that room," Marcus continued, switching between different angles on his computer. "She should appear in at least one of them if she's moving around, but, look." Camera after camera showed the same thing, an empty room with no sign of Elena. The motion sensors remained silent, indicating no movement in the space after 11:54 p.m. At 6 a.m., the automatic lights came on in preparation for the gallery's opening, illuminating the destroyed painting and the single white rose that hadn't been there when Elena disappeared. James finished his preliminary photography and joined them in the security office. "I've checked every inch of that room," he reported. "No other exits except the main entrance we saw her use. No windows large enough for a person to fit through. No ceiling tiles disturbed, no signs of forced entry anywhere." He paused, looking at the monitor showing the empty exhibition hall. "It's like she just vanished." Sarah requested copies of all the security footage and began interviewing Marcus about Elena's background. Elena Vasquez had been painting professionally for over 20 years, with her work featured in galleries across the country. She had moved to New York 5 years ago and had been working exclusively with the Whitmore Gallery for the past 3 years. Her paintings commanded high prices and she had a devoted following among collectors. Was Elena having any personal problems? Sarah asked. Relationship issues, financial difficulties, anything that might cause her to stage her own disappearance? Marcus shook his head emphatically. Elena lived alone in a studio apartment in Brooklyn, had never been married, and, as far as he knew, had no romantic entanglements that might complicate her life. She was completely devoted to her art, Marcus said. Sometimes I worried that she didn't have enough of a life outside the studio, but she always seemed happy. Content, you know. This exhibition was supposed to be her biggest yet. She's been working toward it for over a year. He gestured toward the main hall where Elena's other paintings still hung undamaged. Why would she destroy her own work and disappear just days before her moment of triumph? Sarah made arrangements for a forensics team to process the scene, though she doubted they would find much useful evidence. The gallery's cleaning crew had been through the space the previous afternoon, and the only fingerprints likely to be found would belong to Elena, Marcus, and the gallery staff. Still, procedure demanded a thorough investigation, and Sarah had learned never to overlook any detail, no matter how insignificant it might seem. As they prepared to leave the gallery, Sarah took one last look at the exhibition hall. The destroyed painting drew her attention, but it was the white rose that truly puzzled her. The flower was fresh, as if it had been cut that morning, and it had been placed with deliberate care in the exact center of the room. Someone had wanted it to be found, had wanted it to mean something. But, what? "Mr. Whitmore," she called out as they reached the gallery's entrance. "The white rose, does it have any significance to Elena? Did she ever mention roses in connection with her work or her life?" Marcus thought for a moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Now that you mention it," he said slowly, "Elena did have a series of rose paintings early in her career. Very abstract pieces, nothing like her current work. She told me once that roses represented transformation to her, the beauty that comes from careful cultivation, but also the thorns that protect that beauty. I haven't seen those paintings in years, though. She stopped painting roses long before she started working with me." Sarah exchanged a look with James. Their first real clue, perhaps, or simply another piece of a puzzle that grew more complex with each detail they uncovered. As they drove away from the gallery, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that Elena's disappearance was far more complicated than a simple missing person case. The artist had vanished from a locked room, leaving behind a destroyed masterpiece and a single perfect rose. In Sarah's experience, nothing was ever that simple, and nothing was ever truly impossible. Someone had wanted Elena Vasquez to disappear, and they had been clever enough to make it look like magic. Sarah's job was to prove that even the most impossible mysteries had very human explanations. Part 2. Elena's studio apartment in Brooklyn felt like stepping into the artist's mind. Every surface was covered with sketches, color studies, and half-finished canvases. Paint tubes littered the windowsills, and brushes stood in mason jars filled with turpentine, creating a chaos that somehow seemed perfectly organized to someone who understood the creative process. Sarah and James had obtained a warrant within hours of Elena's disappearance being reported, hoping the artist's personal space might provide clues that the gallery had not yielded. The apartment was a converted warehouse space with high ceilings and enormous windows that flooded the room with natural light. Elena had clearly chosen the location for its artistic potential rather than its comfort. There was a small bed pushed against one wall, a tiny kitchen barely large enough for one person, and a bathroom that had been retrofitted into what was once a storage closet. The rest of the space was devoted entirely to Elena's art. "Look at this," James called out from near the main window. He had discovered Elena's personal workspace, an area where she kept her most private sketches and experimental pieces. Unlike the controlled environment of the gallery, this space revealed Elena's raw creative process. Sketches were pinned to the walls in seemingly random patterns, but, as Sarah studied them more closely, she began to see a progression of ideas developing across the scattered papers. Many of the sketches featured roses, despite Marcus's claim that Elena had stopped painting them years ago. These weren't the abstract representations he had described, but detailed, almost photographic studies of roses in various stages of bloom and decay. Some showed roses being cut by unseen hands, others depicted roses being arranged in complex patterns that seemed to follow some internal logic that Sarah couldn't immediately understand. She was still obsessed with roses, Sarah observed, photographing the sketches with her phone. Marcus either didn't know about these recent drawings or he deliberately misled us about Elena's current interests. She made a note to question the gallery owner again, more thoroughly this time. James had moved to Elena's desk, a massive oak table that dominated one corner of the studio. It was covered with reference books about art history, symbolism, and botanical illustration. He opened one of the books and found it heavily annotated in Elena's handwriting. The margins were filled with notes about color theory, symbolic meanings of different flowers, and what appeared to be personal observations about the relationship between art and memory. "Sarah, you need to see this," James said, his voice carrying a note of excitement. He had found Elena's personal journal, a leather-bound book hidden beneath a stack of art supply catalogs. The journal's pages revealed a side of Elena that neither Marcus nor anyone else had mentioned. Her entries described a growing sense of being watched, of feeling that someone was following her both at the gallery and around her neighborhood. The entries dated back 6 months, beginning with vague feelings of unease and gradually escalating to more specific concerns. "Someone was in the gallery after hours last week," Elena had written 3 weeks earlier. "Marcus insists the security system showed nothing, but I know someone was there. One of my brushes was moved, and there were footprints in the dust near the storage room that weren't there when I left." Sarah made careful notes of the dates and details, planning to compare them with the gallery's security records. More disturbing were Elena's recent entries describing phone calls with no one on the other end, packages delivered to her apartment with no return address, and the persistent feeling that someone was watching her from the building across the street. "I'm being paranoid," Elena had written just days before her disappearance. "But, what if I'm not? What if someone is really trying to scare me? And, if so, why?" The journal's final entry was dated the day of Elena's disappearance. "The exhibition opens tomorrow," she had written. "I should be excited, but I'm terrified instead. Marcus thinks I'm losing my mind, but I know someone was in the gallery again last night. They moved my painting. Just slightly, but enough that I could tell. Who has access to the gallery after hours? Who wants to frighten me, and what do they want?" The entry ended abruptly, as if Elena had been interrupted while writing. Sarah felt a chill as she read Elena's words. This wasn't a case of an artist staging her own disappearance or having some kind of creative breakdown. Elena had been genuinely frightened of someone, and that someone might have finally acted on whatever plans they had been making. The question was who had both the access and the motive to torment Elena, and why had they chosen the night before her exhibition to make their final move? James had continued searching the apartment and made another significant discovery in Elena's bedroom. Tucked beneath her mattress was a small wooden box containing photographs and letters that appeared to date back to Elena's childhood. Most of the photographs showed a young Elena with an older woman who bore a strong family resemblance. The letters were signed, Love, Aunt Rosa, and described a woman who had been both Elena's guardian and her first art teacher after her parents died in a car accident when Elena was 12. Rosa Martinez, Sarah read from one of the letters. Elena's aunt raised her after her parents' death. According to these letters, Rosa was also an artist, and she's the one who taught Elena to paint. Sarah photographed each letter carefully, noting that the correspondence ended abruptly when Elena was 18. The final letter mentioned Rosa's declining health and her plans to move to a retirement community in Florida. What made this discovery significant was a photograph tucked between the letters showing Rosa's art studio. On the wall behind Rosa, barely visible in the background, was a painting of white roses identical to the rose that had been left in the gallery. The similarity was too striking to be coincidental, and Sarah felt they had uncovered their first real connection to Elena's disappearance. "We need to find Rosa Martinez," Sarah said, though she suspected the search might prove difficult. If Rosa had been elderly enough to move to a retirement community when Elena was 18, she might not still be alive. Still, the connection was too important to ignore, and Sarah had learned that even dead ends often led to new information if investigated thoroughly enough. Their search of Elena's apartment yielded one final clue that would prove crucial to their investigation. Hidden in a folder marked Inspiration were newspaper clippings about art thefts and mysterious disappearances in the New York art world over the past 5 years. Elena had been researching cases of artists whose work had been stolen or who had vanished under mysterious circumstances. Her notes suggested she believed there was a pattern to these incidents, though she hadn't been able to determine what connected them. She thought someone was targeting artists, James observed, reading through Elena's research notes. "Look at this, she's identified 12 cases over 5 years where artists disappeared or had major work stolen just before important exhibitions or sales." She was trying to figure out if there was a connection. Elena's research was meticulous, with timelines and detailed notes about each case, but she hadn't reached any conclusions about who might be responsible or why they were targeting artists. As Sarah and James prepared to leave Elena's apartment, Sarah took one final look around the space. The studio felt like a place where someone had been working toward something important, building toward a revelation or understanding that had been interrupted before it could be completed. Elena's research suggested she had stumbled onto something dangerous, something worth making her disappear to keep secret. Someone didn't want Elena to figure out whatever she was investigating, Sarah said as they locked the apartment behind them. The question is whether they succeeded in stopping her permanently, or whether Elena managed to hide something that might help us understand what she discovered. The investigation was becoming more complex with each piece of evidence they uncovered, but Sarah felt they were finally beginning to understand the scope of what they were dealing with. Elena's disappearance wasn't an isolated incident, it was part of something much larger and more dangerous than a simple missing person case. Part 3. Rosa Martinez was very much alive, though tracking her down required 2 days of patient detective work. After checking retirement communities throughout Florida, Sarah finally located her at Sunset Gardens in Clearwater, a facility that specialized in caring for residents with early-stage dementia. The phone conversation with Rosa's caregiver revealed that while Rosa's memory was declining, she still had clear moments, especially when discussing her art or her beloved niece Elena. Sarah caught the first flight to Florida, leaving James to continue investigating the art theft cases Elena had been researching. The 3-hour flight gave her time to review everything they had learned about Elena's disappearance and to prepare questions for Rosa that might unlock the mystery surrounding her niece's vanishing. Sunset Gardens was a sprawling complex of low buildings surrounded by palm trees and carefully maintained gardens. Rosa Martinez was 84 years old, with silver hair and eyes that held flashes of the sharp intelligence that had made her a respected artist in her younger years. She was sitting in the facility's art room when Sarah arrived, working on a watercolor painting of white roses. "You're here about Elena," Rosa said before Sarah could even introduce herself. "I've been expecting someone to come ask about her. She called me last week, very upset about something, but she wouldn't tell me what was wrong." Rosa's voice was clear and strong, though her hands shook slightly as she set down her paintbrush. Sarah explained Elena's disappearance carefully, watching Rosa's face for any reaction that might provide insight. Rosa listened without interruption, her expression growing more troubled as Sarah described the destroyed painting and the white rose left in the gallery. When Sarah finished, Rosa was quiet for a long moment, staring at her own painting with an expression of deep sadness. "The white rose was our signal," Rosa finally said. "When Elena was growing up with me, we had a code. If she was ever in trouble and couldn't speak freely, she would leave me a white rose. I taught her that when she was 13, after some problems at school with bullies. I told her that no matter what happened, if she left me a white rose, I would know she needed help." Rosa's revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Elena hadn't vanished willingly, she had left a desperate cry for help. "But, Elena disappeared from a locked room," Sarah protested. "How could she leave the rose herself if she was taken against her will?" Rosa smiled sadly and gestured toward her painting. The roses she was painting were arranged in a complex pattern that seemed to shift and change as Sarah looked at it, creating an optical illusion that made her slightly dizzy. "Elena learned my techniques," Rosa explained. "I taught her that art isn't just about creating beauty, it's about creating truth, even when that truth is dangerous. Elena was always my best student, more talented than I ever was. If she left that rose, she found a way to do it even under impossible circumstances." Rosa paused, studying Sarah's face carefully. "You don't believe me. You think an old woman with a failing memory is imagining things." Sarah assured Rosa that she was taking everything seriously, which seemed to comfort the elderly woman. Rosa stood up slowly and walked to a cabinet across the room, retrieving a wooden box similar to the one Sarah had found in Elena's apartment. "These are Elena's early paintings," Rosa said, opening the box to reveal small canvases wrapped in tissue paper. "She gave them to me before she left for New York. She said they were too personal to keep, but too important to destroy." The paintings were extraordinary, even accounting for Elena's youth when she created them. Each one depicted roses in various stages of transformation, budding, blooming, withering, and dying. But, what struck Sarah most was the technical skill evident in the work. These weren't the paintings of a teenager learning her craft, they demonstrated a sophistication and understanding of artistic technique that should have taken decades to develop. "Elena was painting like a master by the time she was 16, Rosa said, noticing Sarah's amazement. "I couldn't teach her anything more. That's why I encouraged her to go to art school, even though it meant losing her. She had a gift that needed proper training." Rosa rewrapped the paintings carefully and placed them back in the box. "But, there's something else you need to know about Elena's gift." Rosa explained that Elena possessed an unusual form of photographic memory that allowed her to recreate any image she had ever seen with perfect accuracy. More than that, Elena could study a painting or photograph and identify details that others missed, subtle inconsistencies, hidden signatures, evidence of forgery or alteration that was invisible to normal observation. Elena could look at a painting and tell you if it was authentic or fake within minutes, Rosa said. She could spot restorations, identify the specific pigments used, even determine approximately when a piece had been painted based on the aging patterns in the canvas and paint. I tried to get her to use this ability professionally, but she said it felt like cheating. She wanted to create, not authenticate. This revelation transformed Sarah's understanding of Elena's disappearance. If Elena possessed the ability to identify art forgeries with unusual accuracy, and, if she had been researching mysterious incidents in the New York art world, she might have stumbled onto something much larger than a simple series of thefts. She might have discovered evidence of a sophisticated art forgery operation, one worth killing to protect. Did Elena ever mention anyone from the New York art world who made her uncomfortable? Sarah asked. Gallery owners, collectors, other artists. Rosa thought carefully before answering. She mentioned that Elena had spoken positively about Marcus Whitmore, describing him as honest and supportive. But, there had been other names mentioned over the years, people Elena found questionable or troubling. There was someone named Victor, Rosa said slowly. Elena mentioned him several times over the past year. She said he was involved in art sales somehow, but, there was something about him that made her nervous. She never told me his last name, but, she said he asked too many questions about her work and, seemed to know things about her background that she had never told him. Rosa also remembered Elena mentioning concerns about certain collectors who seemed more interested in the investment value of art than in the artistic merit. Elena believed that art was being treated like stock certificates by people who didn't understand or appreciate what they were buying, Rosa explained. She was particularly worried about pieces being sold without proper authentication, but, when she tried to raise concerns with people in the industry, they told her to mind her own business. As their conversation continued, Rosa revealed one final piece of information that would prove crucial to the investigation. Elena had been working on a special project over the past year, something she had been reluctant to discuss even with her aunt. She said she was creating a record of something important, Rosa remembered. She was being very secretive about it, but, she told me it was the most important work she had ever done. She said if anything ever happened to her, I should make sure people knew about the project. Do you have any idea what this project involved? Sarah asked. Rosa shook her head, but, suggested that Elena might have hidden information about it in her artwork. Elena always embedded secrets in her paintings, Rosa explained. Not obvious things, but, subtle details that told stories for people who knew how to look. If she was working on something dangerous, she would have found a way to document it in her art. Sarah left Florida with more questions than answers, but, with a much clearer understanding of what they were dealing with. Elena hadn't simply vanished, she had been targeted because of her unique abilities and, her investigation into what appeared to be a sophisticated criminal operation. The White Rose had been Elena's final desperate attempt to signal for help, left in the only way she could manage under impossible circumstances. During the flight back to New York, Sarah reviewed her notes and, began forming a theory about Elena's disappearance. Someone had discovered Elena's investigation into art world corruption and, had decided she was too dangerous to allow to continue. They had used Elena's known habits and, schedule to plan her disappearance, choosing the night before her exhibition when they knew she would be alone in the gallery. The destroyed painting and, the carefully placed White Rose suggested that Elena had been forced to watch the destruction of her work before being taken, a psychological torture that would have been devastating to an artist of her sensitivity and, dedication. The question now was whether Elena was still alive, hidden somewhere by people who needed her abilities for their own purposes, or whether she had been killed to protect secrets that were worth more than one artist's life. Sarah was determined to find out, and, Rosa's revelations had given her new directions to pursue. The mysterious Victor, Elena's secret project, and, the sophisticated art authentication skills that had made Elena dangerous to the wrong people, these were the threads that might lead to answers about what had happened to Elena Vasquez and, whether she could still be saved. Part 4. James had spent Sarah's absence in Florida diving deep into Elena's research on art world irregularities, and, what he discovered painted a disturbing picture of systematic fraud within New York's most prestigious galleries and auction houses. Elena's meticulous documentation revealed a pattern of suspicious sales, questionable authentications, and missing artists that stretched back 5 years and involved millions of dollars in potentially fraudulent transactions. She was building a case, James told Sarah when she returned from Florida. He had spread Elena's research across the conference room at the precinct, creating a timeline that revealed the scope of what Elena had uncovered. Look at this, 12 artists who disappeared or died under suspicious circumstances, all of them known for their ability to authenticate artwork or identify forgeries. Elena wasn't just researching random crimes, she was tracking the systematic elimination of people who posed a threat to someone's operation. The pattern was more sophisticated than either detective had initially realized. Each of the missing artists had possessed unusual skills, one had been an expert in Renaissance painting techniques, another specialized in identifying forged signatures, a third had developed methods for dating canvas and paint that were more accurate than traditional carbon dating. All of them had been eliminated at crucial moments when their expertise might have exposed major frauds. Elena figured out that someone was removing the people who could expose their fake artwork, Sarah realized, studying the timeline James had created. But, she also realized she was next on the list because of her authentication abilities. This explained Elena's growing paranoia in the weeks before her disappearance and her desperate attempts to research what was happening to her colleagues. Their investigation received an unexpected breakthrough when Marcus Whitmore called with new information. While reviewing gallery records for an insurance claim related to Elena's destroyed painting, he had discovered discrepancies in the documentation for several pieces that had passed through his gallery over the past 2 years. Someone had been altering authentication certificates and provenance records, creating false histories for paintings that commanded significantly higher prices with the fabricated documentation. "I feel like such a fool," Marcus said when Sarah and James met with him at the gallery. "I trusted my authentication expert completely. Victor Castellanos has been handling authentication for my gallery for 3 years. His credentials were impeccable, his work was thorough, and his fees were reasonable. I never questioned his assessments." Marcus's voice carried the weight of someone who had discovered that his trust had been catastrophically misplaced. Victor Castellanos, the same Victor that Elena had mentioned to Rosa as making her uncomfortable. Sarah asked Marcus for everything he knew about Castellanos, including contact information and records of all the pieces he had authenticated for the gallery. Marcus provided a file that revealed Castellanos's operation was far more extensive than anyone had suspected. "He's been authenticating artwork for galleries throughout the city," Marcus explained, showing them a list of Castellanos's other clients. "Major auction houses, private collectors, even some museums have used his services. If he's been falsifying authentications, the scope of the fraud could be enormous." The list included some of the most respected names in the New York art world, suggesting that Castellanos had carefully built a reputation that gave him access to the most valuable pieces. Sarah and James immediately began investigating Castellanos's background, discovering that his credentials, while impressive, were difficult to verify in detail. His claimed education at European institutions could not be confirmed, and his early work history had gaps that were explained away as time spent doing private research for wealthy collectors. He operated from a small office in Midtown Manhattan and lived alone in an expensive apartment that seemed beyond the means of someone working as an independent art authenticator. The detectives obtained a warrant to search Castellanos's office, hoping to find evidence linking him to Elena's disappearance and the art fraud scheme. What they discovered exceeded their worst expectations. Castellanos's office was equipped with sophisticated equipment for analyzing paint, canvas, and brushwork, but it was also set up for creating forgeries. They found partially completed copies of famous paintings, detailed studies of historical painting techniques, and chemicals used for artificially aging new canvases to make them appear centuries old. More damning was a computer file containing detailed information about dozens of artists, including their specializations, their ability to detect fraud, and assessments of how dangerous they might be to Castellanos's operation. Elena's file was extensive and marked with notations indicating she had been under surveillance for months. The final entry, dated the week before her disappearance, read, "Subject has discovered too much. Immediate action required to protect operation." She was right to be paranoid, James observed, photographing the computer files. Castellanos had been watching her for months, waiting for the right moment to act. They also found evidence that Castellanos hadn't been working alone. Phone records showed regular contact with individuals in other cities, suggesting a national network of art fraud that extended far beyond New York. The breakthrough in locating Elena came from an unexpected source. Among Castellanos's papers, they found rental agreements for several properties around the city, including a warehouse in Queens that was listed as storage for art preservation and restoration. The warehouse was located in an industrial area where unusual activity would be unlikely to attract attention, and it had been leased under a false name that traced back to one of Castellanos's shell companies. Sarah and James coordinated with a SWAT team for the warehouse raid, uncertain what they might find but hoping Elena was still alive and being held at the location. The warehouse appeared abandoned from the outside, with no visible signs of recent activity, but thermal imaging suggested there was at least one person inside the building. The raid revealed the full scope of Castellanos' operation. The warehouse contained a sophisticated forgery workshop, complete with aging equipment, rare pigments, and canvases that had been artificially treated to appear centuries old. But, more importantly, they found Elena alive but unconscious in a small room that had been converted into a makeshift prison cell. Elena had been drugged but was otherwise unharmed, though she showed signs of having been held captive for several days. Medical examination revealed she had been kept sedated to prevent escape attempts, but her captors had apparently intended to keep her alive for an extended period. As Elena gradually regained consciousness in the hospital, she was able to provide crucial information about her capture and what she had learned about Castellanos' operation. "He didn't want to kill me," Elena told Sarah and James once she was alert enough to speak coherently. "He said my abilities were too valuable. He was planning to force me to authenticate his forgeries and help him identify which pieces in major collections were fake so he could target them for replacement." Elena's authentication skills had made her both a threat to Castellanos' existing operation and a valuable asset for expanding it. Elena revealed that Castellanos had been operating his fraud scheme for over 5 years, systematically replacing authentic artwork in private collections and museums with sophisticated forgeries while selling the originals on the black market. His authentication credentials gave him access to examine valuable pieces, allowing him to study them in detail before creating copies and planning their theft. "The other missing artists weren't just killed to protect his secrets," Elena explained. "Some of them were forced to work for him before they died. He's been building an army of forgers and authentication experts, using threats and violence to ensure their cooperation." Elena had been intended as the latest addition to this forced workforce, valued for her unique visual memory and ability to detect even the smallest discrepancies in artwork. The white rose had been Elena's desperate gambit during her final moments in the gallery. Knowing she was about to be taken, she had managed to leave the signal she had learned from Rosa, hoping someone would understand its significance. "I knew you would eventually talk to Rosa," Elena told Sarah. "She's the only person who knew about our code, and I was counting on that connection to help you understand I was still alive." Castellanos was arrested attempting to flee the country, caught at JFK Airport with forged travel documents and a suitcase containing authentication equipment. His arrest led to the discovery of an international art fraud network that had been operating across multiple countries, involving millions of dollars in stolen and forged artwork. Elena's research had exposed not just a local criminal operation, but a sophisticated criminal enterprise that had been targeting the art world's most respected institutions. The investigation's conclusion brought justice for Elena and answers about her disappearance, but it also revealed the vulnerability of the art world to sophisticated fraud. Elena's unique gifts had made her both a target and, ultimately, the key to exposing a criminal network that might have continued operating indefinitely without her intervention. Her courage in conducting the investigation despite growing danger, and her resourcefulness in leaving a signal during her capture, had prevented not just her own death but the continuation of crimes that had already cost other artists their lives. Part 5: The aftermath of Elena's rescue and Castellanos' arrest sent shockwaves through the international art world that continued long after the immediate criminal proceedings were completed. Elena's research, combined with evidence seized from Castellanos' operation, revealed the staggering scope of fraud that had been perpetrated against galleries, museums, and private collectors across multiple continents. The investigation expanded to involve federal authorities, international law enforcement, and art experts from around the world working to identify and recover stolen and forged pieces. Elena spent several weeks recovering from her ordeal, both physically and emotionally. The psychological trauma of being held captive had been compounded by watching her painting being destroyed in front of her, an act of violence that Castellanos had intended as psychological torture. Rosa flew to New York to be with her niece during her recovery, and their reunion provided Elena with the emotional support she needed to begin processing what she had experienced. "I thought I was going to die," Elena told Sarah during one of their final interviews about the case. "But, what terrified me most was the thought that Castellanos would continue destroying art and artists if I didn't find a way to expose him. That's why I had to leave the White Rose, even though I wasn't sure anyone would understand what it meant." Elena's courage during her captivity had extended beyond her own survival to concern for the broader art community that Castellanos had been victimizing. The forensic analysis of Castellanos's forgery operation revealed the sophisticated techniques he had developed for creating fake masterpieces. His workshop contained hundreds of pieces in various stages of completion, including copies of works from the Metropolitan Museum, the Whitney, and private collections belonging to some of the world's wealthiest art collectors. The quality of the forgeries was so high that several had passed expert authentication and had been sold for millions of dollars without detection. Elena's ability to spot the smallest discrepancies was what Castellanos feared most, explained Dr. Margaret Stevens, an art authentication expert who had been brought in to help analyze the recovered pieces. His forgeries could fool traditional authentication methods, but Elena's photographic memory and visual analysis skills could detect inconsistencies that no one else would notice. She represented an existential threat to his entire operation. The investigation revealed that Castellanos had been systematically targeting authentication experts and art historians whose skills posed a threat to his fraud scheme. The 12 missing artists Elena had researched had all been eliminated after discovering evidence of Castellanos's operations or developing expertise that could expose his forgeries. Some had been killed outright, while others had been forced to work for Castellanos before eventually being murdered when they were no longer useful. James worked with federal investigators to trace the international connections of Castellanos's network, discovering similar operations in London, Paris, and Hong Kong. The criminal enterprise had been operating like a multinational corporation, with specialists in different cities focusing on specific aspects of the fraud scheme. Authentication experts, forgers, thieves, and money laundering specialists had all been coordinated through an elaborate communication system that had allowed the network to operate for years without detection. It wasn't just about stealing and forging individual pieces, James explained to Sarah as they reviewed the federal investigation's findings. They were systematically undermining the integrity of the entire art market. Museums, galleries, and collectors had no way of knowing which pieces in their collections were authentic and which were sophisticated fakes. The economic impact was estimated in the hundreds of millions of dollars, with some institutions facing the possibility of financial ruin as the extent of the fraud became clear. Elena's recovery was aided by her decision to return to painting, using her art as a way of processing the trauma she had experienced. Her new work reflected the emotional journey she had been through, with pieces that explored themes of imprisonment, escape, and the power of art to communicate truth even in desperate circumstances. The white roses that had always been part of her artistic vocabulary took on new meaning, representing not just beauty and transformation but also hope and survival. "Art saved my life," Elena told a reporter who interviewed her about her experience. "Not just because my ability to authenticate artwork made me valuable to Castellanos, but because art gave me the language I needed to call for help." The white rose was more than just a signal, it was a painting without canvas, a message created through careful placement and symbolic meaning. "Even when I couldn't speak freely, art gave me a voice." The legal proceedings against Castellanos and his associates extended over many months, with Elena providing crucial testimony that helped prosecutors build their case. Her photographic memory allowed her to provide detailed accounts of conversations she had overheard while in captivity, information about other artists who had been targeted, and descriptions of forged pieces she had been forced to examine during her imprisonment. Her testimony was instrumental in securing convictions not just against Castellanos but against the entire network of criminals who had supported his operations. Marcus Whitmore faced significant challenges in rebuilding his gallery's reputation after discovering that several pieces he had sold contained fraudulent documentation. Rather than hiding from the scandal, he chose to cooperate fully with investigators and to implement new authentication procedures that would prevent similar fraud in the future. He worked with Elena to develop new methods for verifying artwork that combined traditional techniques with Elena's unique visual analysis abilities. Elena's experience taught me that the art world had become too trusting of credentials and too willing to accept surface-level authentication, Marcus explained. We needed to develop better ways of protecting both artists and collectors from sophisticated fraud. The gallery's recovery became a model for other institutions dealing with the aftermath of Castellanos's crimes. Rosa's role in Elena's rescue earned her recognition as an unsung hero of the case. Her decision to teach Elena the white rose signal as a child had provided the key to understanding Elena's disappearance and, ultimately, to exposing the entire criminal network. Despite her advancing dementia, Rosa's artistic wisdom and emotional connection with Elena had proven crucial to solving a case that might otherwise have remained an unsolvable mystery. The broader art world implemented significant changes in response to the scandal, with new authentication procedures, better cooperation between institutions, and improved methods for detecting sophisticated forgeries. Elena's unique abilities led to offers for her to work as a consultant for museums and galleries, helping them identify potentially fraudulent pieces in their collections. I never wanted to be known for my ability to spot fakes, Elena reflected months after her rescue. I wanted to be known for creating something beautiful and meaningful. But I've learned that sometimes protecting art is as important as creating it. If my experience can help prevent other artists from being victimized and help preserve the integrity of artwork for future generations, then maybe something positive can come from what I went through. Sarah and James received commendations for their work on the case, which had grown from a simple missing person investigation into an international criminal investigation. Their persistence in pursuing seemingly impossible leads and their willingness to look beyond the obvious explanations had been crucial to Elena's rescue and the exposure of Castellanos's network. This case taught me that the most impossible mysteries usually have very human explanations, Sarah reflected as she filed her final report. Elena didn't vanish into thin air, she was taken by criminals who were sophisticated enough to make it look like magic. Our job was to prove that even the most carefully planned crimes leave traces that can be followed by patient, thorough investigation. Elena's story became a cautionary tale about the vulnerabilities in the art world, but it also became an inspiration about the power of courage, intelligence, and artistic vision to triumph over criminal enterprise. Her survival and the destruction of Castellanos's network ensured that other artists would be protected from similar threats, and that the art world could begin rebuilding trust in the authentication systems that protect both creators and collectors. The white rose that had started as a childhood signal between Elena and Rosa had become a symbol of resistance against those who would exploit and victimize artists. Elena incorporated white roses into many of her post-rescue paintings, but now they represented not just beauty and transformation, but also the triumph of truth over deception and the power of art to communicate hope even in the darkest circumstances. Her story proved that even when everything seems impossible, human ingenuity and determination can find ways to overcome the most sophisticated criminal schemes and restore justice to a world that depends on trust, authenticity, and the protection of creative expression. In the ancient kingdom of Valdoria, where mountain peaks touched the clouds and royal traditions stretched back 1,000 years, Princess Serafina discovered a truth that would shatter everything she believed about her family's legacy. Hidden beneath the marble floors of the royal library, in a secret chamber that hadn't been opened for 3 centuries, lay documents that revealed the most shocking secret in the kingdom's history: she was not the rightful heir to the throne. The real heir had been living among them all along, disguised as a servant in the royal household, unaware of their true identity. As Serafina held the ancient parchment in her trembling hands, she realized that revealing this truth would not only cost her the crown she had been preparing to inherit her entire life, but could plunge the kingdom into civil war. Yet keeping the secret would mean living a lie that betrayed everything she had been taught about honor, justice, and the sacred duty of royalty to serve truth above all else. The kingdom of Valdoria stretched across a magnificent landscape of snow-capped mountains, emerald valleys, and ancient forests that had witnessed the rise and fall of countless generations of rulers. For 800 years, the House of Celestine had governed from the capital city of Astoria, where the royal palace stood as a testament to centuries of tradition, power, and carefully guarded secrets. Princess Serafina Celestine, heir apparent to the throne, had grown up within these hallowed walls believing she understood her destiny completely, never suspecting that her entire understanding of her family's history was built upon a foundation of lies. At 23, Serafina possessed the grace and intelligence expected of a future queen, combined with an insatiable curiosity that sometimes troubled her parents, King Aldrich and Queen Isabella. She spent countless hours in the royal library, studying the histories of her ancestors and preparing for the responsibilities that would one day fall upon her shoulders. Her tutors praised her dedication to learning about statecraft, diplomacy, and the complex art of ruling a kingdom, but they had no idea that her studies were driven by questions that had haunted her since childhood. The questions had begun innocently enough when Serafina was 12 years old and noticed discrepancies in the royal genealogies. Dates that didn't align properly, gaps in the historical record that seemed too convenient, and portraits of ancestors whose features bore no resemblance to the current royal family. Her tutors had dismissed these observations as the result of poor record-keeping in earlier centuries and artistic liberties taken by court painters, but Serafina's analytical mind could not accept such simple explanations. As she grew older, Serafina's investigations became more systematic and more secretive. She learned to navigate the vast royal library like a detective, seeking out original documents, comparing different versions of historical accounts, and noting inconsistencies that others had overlooked or chosen to ignore. What she discovered was a pattern of alterations, deletions, and fabrications that suggested someone had deliberately rewritten significant portions of Valdoria's royal history. The breakthrough came on a storm-lashed evening in late autumn when Serafina was working alone in the library's oldest section, a wing that housed documents dating back to the kingdom's founding. She had been examining a collection of architectural plans for palace renovations when she noticed something peculiar about the library's floor plan. According to the blueprints from 3 centuries earlier, there should have been a chamber directly beneath the main reading room, but no such space existed in the current building. Serafina spent hours comparing the old plans with the library's present layout, measuring distances and calculating spaces until she was certain that a significant area had been sealed off and forgotten. Armed with this knowledge, she began a careful examination of the library floor, looking for any indication of hidden access points. It was nearly midnight when her persistence was rewarded with the discovery of a section of marble flooring that sounded hollow when tapped. Working with the careful precision of an archaeologist, Serafina located the hidden mechanism that opened the concealed entrance. The chamber below had been sealed for so long that the air was thick with dust and the scent of aged parchment. By the light of her electric torch, she found herself in a room that appeared to have been deliberately preserved as a repository for the most sensitive documents in the kingdom's history. The chamber contained hundreds of documents, books, and artifacts that had been carefully stored and protected from the ravages of time. As Serafina began examining the collection, she realized she had stumbled upon the original, unedited version of Valdoria's royal history, complete with all the uncomfortable truths that had been excised from the official records over the centuries. The most shocking discovery came in a leather-bound chronicle written by King Marcus Celestine, who had ruled Valdoria 3 centuries earlier. According to the official histories, King Marcus had died childless, passing the crown to his younger brother Edmund. But Marcus's private journal told a very different story, one of political intrigue, betrayal, and a secret that had shaped the kingdom's destiny for 300 years. Marcus had indeed had a child, a daughter named Elena, born to his beloved mistress Lady Catherine Moreau. When Marcus died unexpectedly, powerful court nobles had conspired to hide Elena's existence and place Edmund on the throne instead. Elena had been spirited away from the palace as an infant and given to a loyal servant family to raise, her true identity hidden even from herself. The conspirators had then systematically altered the historical records to erase all evidence of her existence, ensuring that Edmund's line would appear to have legitimate claim to the throne. But King Marcus had been wiser than his enemies realized. Before his death, he had hidden proof of Elena's legitimacy in the secret chamber, along with detailed documentation of the conspiracy against her. He had also arranged for Elena to be given a distinctive birthmark that would allow her to be identified if the truth ever needed to be revealed. The birthmark was described in precise detail, a crescent moon shape on the left shoulder, accompanied by 3 small stars arranged in a triangle. Serafina read Marcus's account with growing amazement and horror. According to the hidden documents, she and her family were not the rightful rulers of Valdoria. For 3 centuries, the crown had belonged to Elena's descendants, whoever they might be. The revelation struck her like a physical blow, challenging everything she had believed about her identity, her purpose, and her future. As dawn broke over the palace, Serafina carefully returned the documents to their hiding place and sealed the chamber, her mind reeling with the implications of what she had discovered. She could not ignore the evidence she had found, but neither could she immediately act upon it. The knowledge she now possessed was dangerous enough to destabilize the kingdom and potentially cost thousands of lives if mishandled. During the days that followed her discovery, Serafina struggled to maintain her normal routines while grappling with the weight of her secret knowledge. She found herself studying the servants and courtiers around her with new eyes, wondering if any of them might carry the bloodline that rightfully belonged on Valdoria's throne. The birthmark described in Marcus's journal became an obsession, though she had no way of examining people without arousing suspicion. Her behavior began to change in subtle ways that did not go unnoticed by those closest to her. Queen Isabella commented on her daughter's distraction during court functions, while King Aldrich noticed that Serafina's questions about royal history had taken on a more urgent and specific character. Her closest friend, Lady Evangeline, observed that the princess seemed burdened by some secret worry that she was reluctant to share. The turning point came when Serafina attended a servant celebration in honor of the Harvest Festival, an annual tradition where the royal family mingled informally with the palace staff. During the festivities, she noticed a young woman serving wine who moved with an unconscious grace that seemed almost royal in its bearing. The woman was perhaps 25 years old, with dark hair and intelligent eyes that held a dignity that transcended her humble position. Serafina engaged the young woman in conversation and learned that her name was Mira Thornfield, that she had worked in the palace for 5 years, and that her family had served the royal household for generations. There was something about Mira that captivated Serafina's attention, a quality that she could not quite define but that seemed familiar and important. It was when Mira reached up to adjust a hanging decoration that Serafina caught a glimpse of her left shoulder through the loose neckline of her dress. There, clearly visible for just a moment, was a crescent moon birthmark accompanied by 3 small star-shaped marks arranged in a perfect triangle. Serafina felt her knees weaken as she realized she was looking at the true heir to the throne of Valdoria. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur as Serafina struggled to process the magnitude of her discovery. Mira Thornfield, a servant who had been living and working in the palace for years, was the rightful queen of Valdoria. She was the descendant of Princess Elena, the hidden child whose existence had been erased from history but whose bloodline had survived 3 centuries of concealment. As Serafina lay awake that night, she faced the most difficult decision of her life. She possessed knowledge that could restore justice and return the crown to its rightful owner, but doing so would mean sacrificing everything she had been raised to expect and potentially triggering a crisis that could tear the kingdom apart. The loyal servants who had protected Elena's descendants for generations had done so at enormous personal cost, keeping a secret that had preserved both Myra's life and the kingdom's stability. Yet Serafina also understood that truth had its own demands, and that honor required her to acknowledge what she had learned. The question was not whether the truth should be revealed, but how it could be done in a way that served justice without destroying the kingdom she had been raised to love and protect. As she watched the first light of dawn creep across her chamber windows, Serafina knew that her comfortable life as the heir apparent was over, and that she now faced challenges that would test every principle she had ever held dear. Part 2. The days following Serafina's discovery of Myra's true identity were among the most challenging of her life. She found herself caught between her duty to uphold truth and justice, and her deep love for the kingdom that could be torn apart by the revelation of its illegitimate royal line. Every interaction with her parents became a careful dance of maintaining normalcy while wrestling with knowledge that changed everything she understood about their family's right to rule. Serafina began to study Mira more carefully, seeking opportunities to observe the young woman without arousing suspicion. What she discovered only reinforced her certainty about Myra's true identity. Despite her humble position as a servant, Mira possessed an innate nobility that manifested in countless small ways. She showed natural leadership among the other servants, resolving disputes with wisdom beyond her years and demonstrating an instinctive understanding of fairness and justice that seemed to flow from some deeper source than mere experience. More telling were the subtle physical resemblances that became apparent once Serafina knew what to look for. Myra's facial structure echoed portraits of ancient Celestine rulers that hung in the palace's portrait gallery, particularly those of King Marcus himself. Her bearing, her gestures, even her unconscious mannerisms spoke of royal blood that had somehow survived centuries of concealment while maintaining its essential character. Serafina also began investigating Myra's family history, using her privileged access to palace records to trace the Thornfield lineage. What she found was a carefully constructed fiction that had been maintained for 3 centuries. The Thornfield family had indeed served in the palace for generations, but their service had begun exactly when Princess Elena would have been hidden among the servants. Each generation had produced individuals who held positions of particular trust and responsibility, suggesting they had been carefully protected and guided by those who knew their true significance. The emotional burden of her secret knowledge began to take its toll on Serafina's relationships with those closest to her. Her friendship with Lady Evangeline became strained as Serafina found herself unable to share the discovery that had transformed her understanding of everything around her. Her interactions with her parents grew increasingly difficult as she struggled to maintain the pretense that nothing had changed while knowing that their entire reign was built upon a foundation of lies and deception. King Aldrich noticed his daughter's troubled state and attempted to draw her out about what was troubling her. During one of their private dinners, he spoke to her about the responsibilities of leadership and the difficult choices that rulers sometimes faced. There are times, he told her, when the truth can be more dangerous than lies, when protecting people requires keeping secrets that weigh heavily on the conscience. A wise ruler must learn to bear these burdens for the greater good of the kingdom. Serafina wondered if her father's words carried deeper meaning, if perhaps he too knew about the family's illegitimate claim to the throne and had made the conscious choice to maintain the deception for the sake of stability. The possibility that her parents might be aware of the truth while continuing to live the lie made her situation even more complex and morally ambiguous. Queen Isabella also seemed to sense her daughter's inner turmoil, approaching the problem from a different angle. During a private conversation in the royal gardens, she spoke to Serafina about the nature of legitimacy and the different sources of a ruler's authority. A crown is more than a symbol, Isabella explained. It represents the consent of the people, the ability to govern wisely, and the willingness to sacrifice personal desires for the common good. Blood alone does not make a ruler, it is what one does with power that determines worthiness to hold it. These conversations left Serafina more conflicted than ever. Her parents' words suggested a sophisticated understanding of the complexities of royal legitimacy that went beyond simple hereditary claims. Yet she could not shake the feeling that justice demanded acknowledgement of the truth, regardless of the practical arguments for maintaining the status quo. Serafina's internal struggle was complicated by her growing personal interest in Mira herself. The more she observed and interacted with the young woman, the more impressed she became with Myra's character and capabilities. Mira demonstrated compassion for those beneath her in the palace hierarchy, showed remarkable intelligence in her work, and exhibited a natural sense of justice that manifested in her daily interactions with others. During one memorable incident, Serafina witnessed Mira intervene in a dispute between 2 junior servants that could have escalated into a serious conflict. Myra's handling of the situation displayed diplomatic skills and wisdom that would have been impressive in a trained courtier, let alone a woman who had received no formal education in conflict resolution. She listened carefully to both sides, identified the underlying issues that had caused the disagreement, and proposed a solution that satisfied both parties while addressing the systemic problems that had created the conflict in the first place. How did you learn to handle disputes so effectively? Serafina asked Mira during a chance encounter in the palace corridors. Mira seemed surprised by the question and the princess's interest in her work. I suppose I've always been able to see different sides of problems, Mira replied thoughtfully. My grandmother used to say that understanding people's motivations was the key to finding solutions that everyone could live with. She taught me that most conflicts arise from misunderstandings or unmet needs rather than genuine malice. The wisdom in Myra's words and the natural authority with which she spoke reinforced Serafina's conviction about her true identity. As Serafina spent more time around Mira, she began to notice other servants treating the young woman with a subtle deference that went beyond what her official position would warrant. Older servants sought her advice on personal matters, younger ones looked to her for guidance and protection, and even the palace steward seemed to defer to her judgment on questions involving staff management. It was as if some unconscious recognition of her true nature influenced how others responded to her presence. The turning point in Serafina's thinking came when she witnessed Myra's interaction with a group of local children who had come to the palace as part of a charity event. Myra's natural affinity with the children was remarkable, but it was her instinctive understanding of how to balance authority with compassion that truly impressed Serafina. She watched Mira organize activities that entertained the children while teaching them valuable lessons about cooperation and kindness, demonstrating leadership qualities that seemed to emerge effortlessly from her character. She would make a wonderful queen, Serafina thought as she observed Myra's interactions. The realization brought both relief and sadness, as she recognized that revealing the truth might not only serve justice but could actually benefit the kingdom by placing someone of exceptional character on the throne. Yet it would also mean the end of her own dreams and expectations, the dissolution of her identity as the heir to Valdoria's crown. Serafina's moral crisis deepened when she considered the impact her decision would have on others beyond herself. Her parents had devoted their lives to serving Valdoria according to their understanding of their duties and responsibilities. They had ruled wisely and, well, earning the love and respect of their people through decades of dedicated service. Revealing the truth about their illegitimate claim to the throne would not only destroy their reputations but could undermine everything they had accomplished for the kingdom. There was also the question of Myra's own wishes and welfare to consider. The young woman had lived her entire life as a servant, with no knowledge of her true heritage or claim to royalty. Learning that she was the rightful queen of Valdoria would transform her life completely, thrusting her into a position for which she had received no preparation and forcing her to abandon everything familiar and comfortable about her existence. Yet as Serafina continued to observe Myra's character and capabilities, she became increasingly convinced that the revelation of the truth would ultimately serve both justice and the kingdom's best interests. Mira possessed natural leadership abilities, genuine compassion for others, and an instinctive understanding of fairness that suggested she had inherited not just the blood of royalty but the essential qualities that made for exceptional rulership. The question that tormented Serafina was not whether the truth should eventually be revealed, but how and when such a revelation could be managed in a way that minimized harm while serving the cause of justice. She needed to find a path forward that would acknowledge Myra's rightful claim while protecting the kingdom from the chaos and violence that could result from a sudden and dramatic change in the royal succession. As autumn deepened into winter, Serafina made a decision that would change the course of both her life and the kingdom's future. She would find a way to tell Mira the truth about her heritage, but she would do so carefully and gradually, ensuring that Mira was prepared for the responsibilities that would come with acknowledging her rightful claim to the throne. The conversation would be the beginning of a process that could take years to complete, but it would also be the first step toward restoring justice and truth to the kingdom of Valdoria. Part 3 Winter settled over Valdoria with unusual severity, bringing heavy snows that isolated the capital and created an atmosphere of intimacy within the palace walls. For Serafina, the enforced closeness of winter life provided both opportunity and challenge as she struggled with how to approach Mira about the truth of her heritage. The princess had spent weeks planning what she would say, but she found that no amount of preparation could adequately address the magnitude of what she needed to communicate. The opportunity for a private conversation finally, arose during the Feast of Midwinter, a traditional celebration that brought together all members of the palace community in a spirit of equality and shared festivity. For one night each year, the rigid social hierarchies that governed palace life were relaxed, allowing servants and nobles to mingle freely in celebration of the kingdom's survival through another year's challenges. Serafina found Mira in the palace conservatory, a glass-enclosed garden that provided a peaceful refuge from the festivities in the main halls. Mira was tending to the exotic plants that the royal gardeners maintained throughout the winter, her movements gentle and precise as she checked soil moisture and adjusted the positioning of tender seedlings. The sight of her caring for growing things reinforced Serafina's sense that Mira possessed the nurturing instincts essential for good leadership. "You have a gift with growing things," Serafina observed as she approached, causing Mira to look up in surprise at finding the princess in such an informal setting. Mira curtsied quickly, but Serafina gestured for her to relax. "Please, tonight we set aside such formalities. I was hoping we might have a chance to speak privately." Mira's expression showed both curiosity and concern at the princess's unusual request. "Of course, Your Highness. Is there something I can help you with?" Her voice carried the respectful tone of a servant, but her bearing remained naturally dignified in a way that spoke to her inherent nobility. Serafina had rehearsed this moment countless times, but, faced with the reality of beginning a conversation that would change both their lives forever, she found herself struggling for the right words. "What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible," she began carefully. "But, I need you to listen with an open mind, because what I've discovered affects not just our lives, but the future of the entire kingdom." The gravity in Serafina's voice clearly alarmed Mira, whose expression grew serious as she set aside her gardening tools and gave the princess her full attention. "I'm listening," she said simply, though her posture suggested she was preparing herself for difficult news. Serafina began by explaining her research into the kingdom's history, describing the discrepancies she had noticed in the official records and her discovery of the hidden chamber beneath the royal library. She spoke carefully and methodically, building her case like a scholar presenting evidence to support a controversial thesis. Mira listened without interruption, though her expression grew increasingly puzzled as Serafina described the conspiracy that had hidden Princess Elena's existence 3 centuries earlier. "I don't understand why you're telling me this," Mira said when Serafina paused in her account. "Ancient history is fascinating, but what does it have to do with me?" Her confusion was genuine and touching, demonstrating that she had no suspicion of her own significance to the story Serafina was telling. Taking a deep breath, Serafina described the birthmark that King Marcus had arranged for his daughter Elena to carry, explaining how it had been intended as a means of identification if the truth ever needed to be revealed. She watched Myra's face carefully as understanding began to dawn, noting the moment when the young woman unconsciously touched her left shoulder where the distinctive markings lay hidden beneath her clothing. "You've seen my birthmark," Mira said slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But, how could you know what it looks like unless—" She trailed off, clearly struggling to process the implications of what Serafina was suggesting. "You are Princess Elena's descendant," Serafina confirmed gently. "You are the rightful heir to the throne of Valdoria. My family, including myself, are usurpers who have held power that rightfully belongs to your bloodline for 300 years. The words felt strange and painful as she spoke them, acknowledging a truth that destroyed everything she had believed about her own identity and purpose. Myra's reaction was not what Serafina had expected. Instead of excitement, ambition, or even anger at the injustice that had been done to her family, Mira showed primarily confusion and distress. She sank onto a nearby garden bench, her face pale with shock as she tried to absorb what she had been told. "This cannot be true," Mira said, shaking her head as if she could physically reject the information. "I'm a servant. I've always been a servant. My family has served in this palace for generations because we are loyal subjects, not because we have any claim to royalty." Her voice carried a note of desperation, as if she were pleading with Serafina to take back the revelation that threatened to upend her entire understanding of her life and identity. Serafina sat beside Mira on the bench, speaking with the gentle patience of someone who understood the overwhelming nature of what she was communicating. "I know how difficult this must be to accept," she said. "I've had weeks to process this information, and I still struggle with its implications. But, the evidence is clear, and, more importantly, I've watched you interact with others. You have natural leadership abilities that go far beyond what training or experience could provide. You possess the instincts of someone born to rule." "I don't want to rule," Mira said firmly, her voice stronger now as her initial shock gave way to clearer thinking. "I'm happy with my life as it is. I have work that I find meaningful, relationships that matter to me, and a place in the world that I understand. Why would I want to give all of that up for the burden and isolation of royalty?" Her response surprised Serafina, who had expected that anyone would be thrilled to learn they were entitled to a crown. The conversation continued for hours as Serafina patiently answered Myra's questions and addressed her concerns about the revelation. Gradually, Mira began to accept the truth of her heritage, though she remained deeply troubled by its implications for her future and, for the kingdom's stability. She asked thoughtful questions about the evidence Serafina had discovered, demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of the political complications that would arise from revealing the truth, and showed remarkable concern for how the revelation might affect others, including Serafina herself. "What will happen to you and your family if this becomes known?" Mira asked, showing a generosity of spirit that impressed Serafina even more than her natural leadership abilities. "You've been raised to expect the throne, and your parents have devoted their lives to serving Valdoria. This revelation would destroy their legacy and leave you without purpose or position." Serafina had been wrestling with these same questions since her discovery of the truth. "I don't know," she admitted honestly. "But, I do know that justice demands acknowledgement of the truth, regardless of the personal cost. My family has benefited from an injustice for 3 centuries. We cannot continue to do so indefinitely simply because the truth is inconvenient or painful." Myra's response to this declaration revealed the depth of her character and the natural wisdom that marked her as someone truly worthy of royal authority. "Justice is important," she agreed. "But, so is mercy, and so is consideration for the welfare of all the people who would be affected by dramatic change. Perhaps there is a way to acknowledge the truth without destroying everything that has been built upon the original deception." As their conversation drew to a close, both young women understood that they had begun a process that would require careful thought, planning, and gradual implementation. The truth could not be ignored, but neither could it be revealed precipitously without considering all the consequences for the kingdom and its people. They agreed to meet regularly to discuss how they might proceed, and to begin the delicate process of preparing for changes that could take years to implement safely. "I need time to think about all of this," Mira said as they prepared to return to the festivities that were still continuing in the palace's main halls. "This changes everything about how I understand myself and my place in the world. But, I want you to know that I'm grateful you chose to tell me the truth, even though it would have been easier for you to keep the secret forever." Serafina felt a profound sense of relief at Myra's response, recognizing that she had chosen to confide in someone whose character was strong enough to handle such momentous information with grace and wisdom. "I believe that together we can find a way to serve both truth and the kingdom's best interests," she replied. "It won't be easy, but I think we can create a path forward that honors justice while protecting the people we both care about." As they walked back toward the palace's main halls, both women understood that their lives had been forever changed by their conversation. Serafina had taken the first crucial step toward righting a historical injustice, while Mira had learned that her destiny was far different from anything she had imagined. The challenges ahead would test both their characters and their commitment to finding solutions that served something greater than their own personal interests. The future of Valdoria now depended on their ability to work together in pursuit of a truth that was large enough to encompass both justice and mercy, both acknowledgement of past wrongs and protection of present stability. Their unlikely partnership would become the foundation for changes that would reshape the kingdom's understanding of legitimacy, leadership, and the complex relationship between truth and power in the governance of nations. The months following Serafina's revelation to Mira unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance between truth and discretion. Both young women understood that the knowledge they shared carried explosive potential that needed to be handled with extraordinary care. They began meeting regularly in the conservatory, using their apparent interest in the palace gardens as cover for conversations that gradually developed into a comprehensive plan for addressing the legitimacy crisis that threatened to tear Valdoria apart. Myra's initial shock had given way to a thoughtful acceptance of her heritage, but she remained deeply committed to finding a solution that would minimize harm to all involved. Her natural wisdom and generous spirit led her to propose an approach that would acknowledge the truth while protecting the kingdom from the chaos that could result from a sudden and dramatic revelation of the royal family's illegitimate claim to power. "The people of Valdoria love your family," Mira observed during one of their meetings. "Your parents have ruled wisely and, well, for over 20 years. The stability and prosperity the kingdom has enjoyed under their leadership is real, regardless of questions about bloodline legitimacy. Any solution we develop must take into account the genuine good that has been accomplished and the welfare of the people who depend on continuity of governance." Serafina was moved by Myra's concern for her family's reputation and legacy, recognizing that someone with lesser character might have demanded immediate restoration of their rights regardless of the consequences. "Your willingness to consider my family's position demonstrates exactly why you would make an exceptional queen," she replied. "You're already thinking like a ruler, putting the kingdom's welfare above your own immediate interests." Together, they developed a plan that would gradually transition power while maintaining stability and protecting all parties involved. The process would begin with Mira receiving education in statecraft, diplomacy, and royal protocol under the pretense of being trained as a special advisor to the crown. This would allow her to develop the skills she would need while providing a plausible explanation for her increased prominence in palace life. Serafina used her influence to arrange for Mira to work directly with the royal tutors who had educated her own education in leadership and governance. She presented this arrangement to her parents as part of an initiative to identify and develop talented individuals from among the palace staff who might serve in important administrative positions. King Aldrich and Queen Isabella approved the program enthusiastically, never suspecting that they were helping to prepare their own replacement. Mira proved to be an exceptional student, mastering complex concepts of law, economics, and international relations with a speed that astonished her tutors. Her natural intelligence, combined with her instinctive understanding of human nature and her genuine concern for justice, made her ideally suited for the challenges of royal leadership. Within months, she was participating in discussions of policy and administration that would have challenged experienced courtiers. The transformation in Myra's circumstances did not go unnoticed by others in the palace, though the true reason for her elevation remained secret. Some servants expressed pride in seeing one of their own recognized for her abilities, while others wondered what special qualities had attracted the royal family's attention. A few courtiers grumbled about the precedent of promoting servants to positions of influence, but most were impressed by Myra's competence and diplomatic skills. King Aldrich became particularly fond of Mira, frequently seeking her opinion on matters of governance and expressing admiration for her insights into the needs and concerns of ordinary citizens. "She has a perspective that those of us born to privilege sometimes lack," he told Serafina during one of their private dinners. "Her understanding of how royal policies affect common people is invaluable for making wise decisions." Queen Isabella was equally impressed by Myra's character and abilities, though she sometimes seemed puzzled by the young woman's natural grace and bearing. "There's something almost regal about her," Isabella observed to Serafina. "She carries herself with a dignity that seems innate rather than learned. It's quite remarkable for someone of her background." These comments made Serafina wonder if her mother might be beginning to suspect something unusual about Myra's true nature. As Myra's education progressed and her role in palace affairs expanded, Serafina began preparing for the next phase of their plan, the gradual revelation of historical truths that would lay the groundwork for acknowledging Myra's legitimate claim to the throne. This process began with scholarly discussions about the importance of historical accuracy and the responsibility of each generation to correct the errors and omissions of previous eras. Serafina used her position to commission a comprehensive review of the royal archives, ostensibly as part of a project to preserve important historical documents for future generations. This review provided a legitimate reason for examining the oldest and most sensitive records in the palace's collection, creating opportunities to discover inconsistencies and gaps that would eventually lead to the hidden chamber beneath the library. The process of preparing the kingdom for revelations about its history required extraordinary patience and careful timing. Serafina and Mira worked together to identify key individuals whose support would be crucial when the truth was eventually revealed: trusted advisors, military leaders, and influential nobles whose endorsement could help legitimize the transition of power when the time came. One of their most important allies proved to be Lord Chancellor Edmund Blackwood, an elderly statesman who had served the royal family for over 4 decades. Lord Blackwood possessed both the legal expertise and the moral authority needed to validate the historical evidence when it was presented. More importantly, his reputation for integrity was so well established that his support would carry enormous weight with both the nobility and the common people. Serafina approached Lord Blackwood carefully, beginning with general discussions about the importance of legal and historical accuracy before gradually introducing more specific concerns about gaps in the royal genealogical records. The Chancellor's scholarly mind was immediately engaged by the intellectual challenge of resolving historical discrepancies, and he threw himself into the research with the enthusiasm of someone discovering a fascinating puzzle. "There are indeed irregularities in the historical record," Lord Blackwood reported after weeks of investigation. "The documentation surrounding the succession 3 centuries ago is surprisingly sparse, and what does exist sometimes contradicts itself. It's possible that important information was lost over time, but it's also possible that deliberate alterations were made for reasons we can no longer determine." His findings provided exactly the scholarly foundation Serafina needed for the eventual revelation of the truth. Meanwhile, Mira continued to demonstrate her fitness for leadership through her handling of increasingly complex responsibilities. She mediated disputes between noble families with wisdom that impressed even the most skeptical courtiers, developed innovative solutions to administrative challenges that had puzzled government officials for years, and showed a remarkable ability to connect with people from all levels of society. One particularly significant test came when a serious conflict arose between merchants and farmers over trade regulations that were affecting food prices throughout the kingdom. Traditional approaches to resolving such disputes had involved prolonged negotiations that often satisfied neither party while causing hardship for ordinary citizens who depended on stable food supplies. Mira proposed a revolutionary approach that involved bringing representatives of all affected groups together for direct negotiations facilitated by neutral mediators. Her solution acknowledged the legitimate concerns of both merchants and farmers while protecting the interests of consumers who had no direct voice in the dispute. The success of this approach not only resolved the immediate crisis but established new precedents for collaborative problem-solving that could be applied to other challenges facing the kingdom. "She has the makings of a truly great ruler," King Aldrich confided to Serafina after observing Myra's handling of the trade dispute. "Her ability to see all sides of complex problems and find solutions that serve the common good is exactly what effective leadership requires. I'm beginning to think we should consider giving her even greater responsibilities in the kingdom's administration." Serafina felt both pride and sadness at her father's praise for Myra's abilities, knowing that he was unknowingly recognizing the qualities that made Mira the rightful heir to his throne. The irony of the situation was profound. The man whose family had usurped the crown was now advocating for greater power to be given to the person who should have inherited that crown by right. As winter gave way to spring, Serafina and Mira began preparing for the most delicate phase of their plan, the revelation of the truth about Valdoria's royal succession. They had spent months building the foundation for this moment, educating Mira in the skills she would need as queen, identifying supporters who would help legitimize the transition, and preparing the legal and historical documentation that would validate their claims. The process they had developed would unfold gradually over the course of years, allowing time for the kingdom to adjust to new realities while maintaining the stability and continuity that were essential for good governance. It was a plan that honored both justice and mercy, acknowledging past wrongs while protecting present welfare, and ensuring that the transfer of power would serve the kingdom's best interests rather than simply satisfying abstract principles of legitimacy. Yet both young women understood that even the most carefully planned revelation carried enormous risks. The knowledge they possessed had the power to reshape Valdoria's understanding of itself, to challenge fundamental assumptions about authority and legitimacy, and to test the kingdom's commitment to justice when that justice came at a personal cost to those who had benefited from historical injustices. Part 5. The revelation of Valdoria's true royal lineage began not with a dramatic announcement, but with the scholarly discovery that Serafina and Lord Blackwood had carefully orchestrated. During the spring of what would become known as the Year of Truth, the Chancellor presented his findings about historical irregularities to King Aldrich and Queen Isabella, explaining that his research had uncovered evidence of significant gaps and inconsistencies in the royal genealogical records dating back 3 centuries. The documentation from King Marcus's reign is particularly problematic, Lord Blackwood reported during a private meeting in the royal study. There are references to events and people that don't appear in other records, and some of the official histories contradict contemporary accounts that I've found in other archives. I believe there may be important historical documents that have been lost or deliberately concealed over time. King Aldrich received this news with the calm dignity of a ruler accustomed to facing difficult challenges, though Serafina noticed subtle signs of concern in her father's expression. "What do you recommend we do about these discrepancies?" he asked the Chancellor. "Is it possible to resolve them definitively, or must we accept that some aspects of our history will remain forever unclear?" Lord Blackwood's response followed the script that he and Serafina had carefully developed. "I would recommend a comprehensive search of all palace archives, including areas that may not have been thoroughly examined in recent centuries. It's possible that missing documents are simply stored in forgotten locations rather than having been deliberately hidden or destroyed." The suggestion provided exactly the justification needed for examining the hidden chamber beneath the library. The discovery of the secret chamber was presented as an unexpected breakthrough in the historical research project. Lord Blackwood and Serafina worked together to stage the moment when construction workers examining the library's foundation would break through into the hidden room, ensuring that multiple witnesses would be present to verify the authenticity of what was found. When King Marcus's private chronicles and the other concealed documents were brought to light, their contents sent shockwaves through the royal court. The evidence of Princess Elena's existence and the conspiracy to deny her rightful inheritance was documented with such thoroughness that its authenticity could not be questioned. More importantly, the documents provided clear instructions for identifying Elena's descendants through the distinctive birthmarks that had been passed down through generations of her bloodline. The revelation that there had been a hidden heir to the throne 3 centuries earlier created an immediate crisis for the royal family, but King Aldrich and Queen Isabella responded with remarkable grace and wisdom. Rather than attempting to suppress or discredit the evidence, they chose to acknowledge the historical injustice while working to determine what could be done to address it in the present day. "We must face the possibility that our family's claim to the throne is not legitimate," King Aldrich announced to his closest advisors during an emergency council session. "If Princess Elena's descendants can be identified and verified, we have a moral obligation to acknowledge their rightful claim, regardless of the personal cost to ourselves." His willingness to put justice above personal interest demonstrated the nobility of character that had made him a beloved ruler, even if his bloodline's claim to authority was questionable. The process of identifying Elena's descendants became a kingdom-wide search that captivated public attention and generated intense speculation about who might carry the ancient bloodline. Citizens throughout Valdoria came forward claiming to possess the distinctive birthmarks described in King Marcus's records, creating a complex challenge for the team of experts assembled to verify legitimate claims. Myra's identification as the true heir was handled with careful ceremony designed to emphasize the legitimacy of the process and the thoroughness of the verification procedures. When she revealed her birthmarks to the panel of experts, their confirmation of the match with King Marcus's detailed descriptions created a moment of profound historical significance that resonated throughout the kingdom. The public revelation of Myra's identity as the rightful queen of Valdoria was managed with extraordinary care to ensure a smooth transition of power that would maintain stability while acknowledging justice. Rather than demanding immediate abdication from King Aldrich, Mira proposed a gradual transition that would allow her to complete her preparation for royal responsibilities while giving the kingdom time to adjust to the dramatic change in their understanding of legitimate succession. "I have lived my entire life as a subject of this kingdom," Mira announced during her first public address as the acknowledged heir. "King Aldrich and Queen Isabella have ruled with wisdom and compassion, earning the love and respect of all Valdorians. My goal is not to overturn everything they have accomplished, but to build upon their legacy while ensuring that our kingdom's future is founded upon truth and justice rather than historical deception." The transition period that followed became a remarkable example of peaceful change that honored both legal legitimacy and practical governance needs. Mira officially became Queen Designate while King Aldrich retained executive authority during a 2-year period designed to ensure continuity of government and completion of Mira's royal education. The arrangement satisfied both those who demanded immediate recognition of Mira's rights and those who feared that sudden change could destabilize the kingdom. Serafina's role during this transition period proved to be one of the most challenging and rewarding experiences of her life. Having sacrificed her own claim to the throne in service of justice, she found new purpose as Mira's closest advisor and the primary architect of the kingdom's constitutional reforms. Her willingness to support the rightful heir despite the personal cost earned her widespread admiration and established her as a symbol of integrity and selfless service. "Princess Serafina has demonstrated the highest ideals of nobility," Mira declared during the formal ceremony recognizing the transition. Her courage in revealing the truth, her wisdom in helping to manage this transition, and her generosity in supporting justice even when it required personal sacrifice embody the best traditions of royal service. "I can imagine no one better qualified to serve as my closest advisor and the guardian of our kingdom's commitment to truth and justice." The constitutional changes that accompanied Mira's accession to the throne reflected the lessons learned from 3 centuries of concealed injustice. New laws were established requiring regular reviews of historical records, protecting the rights of those who challenged official accounts when they possessed credible evidence, and ensuring that future successions would be based on verified legal claims rather than simply accepted tradition. King Aldrich and Queen Isabella were granted the title of King Father and Queen Mother, allowing them to retain their dignity while acknowledging the changed circumstances of Valdoria's royal succession. Their gracious acceptance of the transition and their wholehearted support for Mira's reign helped to legitimize the change in the eyes of both the nobility and the common people. "We have learned that true nobility lies not in clinging to unearned privilege, but in recognizing and supporting justice even when it requires personal sacrifice," King Aldrich said during his final address as monarch. Queen Mira represents the restoration of legitimate authority to Valdoria's throne, but, more importantly, she represents the triumph of truth, mercy, and wisdom over the deceptions and injustices that have shaped our kingdom's history for too long. Queen Mira's coronation became a celebration not just of her personal elevation, but of Valdoria's commitment to building a future based on justice and truth rather than comfortable lies. The ceremony incorporated elements that honored both the kingdom's ancient traditions and its commitment to acknowledging and correcting historical wrongs. Representatives from throughout the realm attended, including many who had served the previous royal family and who pledged their loyalty to the rightful queen. In her coronation address, Queen Mira spoke eloquently about the responsibilities that came with her restored inheritance and her commitment to serving all Valdorians regardless of their role in the historical events that had brought her to the throne. "A crown is not a prize to be won, but a burden to be carried in service of others," she declared. "I accept this responsibility not because of my bloodline, but because I am committed to using whatever authority I possess to create a kingdom where truth, justice, and mercy guide all our actions." The years that followed Mira's coronation proved that the careful transition had achieved its goals of maintaining stability while restoring legitimacy to Valdoria's royal succession. Under her leadership, the kingdom experienced unprecedented prosperity and social harmony as her natural wisdom and genuine concern for all her subjects guided policy decisions that benefited every level of society. Serafina found profound fulfillment in her role as the Queen's closest advisor, discovering that her true calling lay not in wielding power herself but in helping others use power wisely and justly. Her friendship with Mira deepened into a partnership that combined their different strengths and perspectives in service of creating the most effective and compassionate government possible. The story of Valdoria's transformation became a model for other kingdoms facing questions about legitimacy, succession, and the relationship between historical truth and present stability. Delegations of scholars and statesmen visited from throughout the known world to study how a potentially catastrophic crisis had been transformed into an opportunity for positive change that strengthened rather than weakened the kingdom's foundations. Truth and justice are not luxuries that can be pursued only when convenient, Queen Mira reflected years later when asked about the lessons of her reign. They are necessities that must be honored even when they require personal sacrifice and difficult change. A kingdom built upon lies, no matter how comfortable those lies may be, cannot provide the foundation for lasting peace and prosperity that its people deserve. The legacy of the Year of Truth extended far beyond the resolution of Valdoria's succession crisis, establishing principles and precedents that would guide the kingdom's development for generations to come. The courage that Serafina had shown in revealing uncomfortable truths, the wisdom that Mira had demonstrated in managing the transition, and the grace that King Aldrich and Queen Isabella had shown in accepting necessary change became the foundation for a new understanding of what royal service truly meant. In the end, the revelation of Valdoria's hidden history proved that justice and stability need not be opposing forces when handled with wisdom, patience, and genuine concern for the welfare of all involved. The kingdom that emerged from its constitutional crisis was stronger, more just, and more prosperous than it had ever been, proving that truth, however painful it might be initially, ultimately serves the best interests of all who have the courage to embrace it.